I would like, if I may, to take you on a strange journey.
Good evening and welcome to the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast. I'm your host, Antonio. Very happy to have a returning guest back on the show to talk about the DePalma Files. I've got Brett of DISSECT That Film back to talk about more DePalma, and I'm excited to have him. How you doing, man?
I am doing good. I'm excited to be back, especially talking about a couple movies that I'm not super familiar with. So this is going to be a lot of fun.
Was it a first time watch for both?
For one of them was a first time watch. I believe I've seen the other one, but it was one that kind of didn't stick in my mind.
After our last episode on DePalma, we did the Fury and the Carrie double feature, so like the ESP double feature, and you were just saying how Carrie was like a part of your childhood. Like you grew up watching that movie, seeing your dad watching it, and then the Fury was like a later discovery that you grew to appreciate. One of the things that I've learned about DePalma films as I've watched them through my entire life and absorbing them more and more is everyone likes to call him a Hitchcock ripoff, but I always thought that he just liked to pay homage to masters of suspense, right? It didn't necessarily just have to be Hitchcock, and in this episode today, we're going to kind of talk about that. But before we even get into this, with these films, I've decided to do the DePalma Files because I noticed that a lot of these films pair well together. The Carrie and Fury double feature really works. It's an ESP thing. And then with this one, we've kind of got like his tribute to the masters of suspense. We've got his Hitchcock and his Blow Up, essentially, remake. But then he went through a sleazy period too, and we're going to cover that eventually, but his sleazy films of Body Double and Dress to Kill, that makes a great double feature. So as I keep going back through his catalog, I'm not sure if it was intentional, but he was going through like these waves of two films by two films by two films that were very similar in theme to each other. And to me, that's what makes his catalog so immersive, because it never feels like he's stuck in one lane. Do you get what I'm trying to say with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It just I definitely sense themes with him as you go through his filmography, and it's like how it's not like you get a whole series. It's like, yeah, you get one here, and it may not even be the next film. It could be one that he puts out a decade later, but they have some sort of connection. Yeah, I appreciate that about DePalma.
Again, too, like the dude is always reinventing himself, which gets me furious at the clature of him, that he is just like a one-note guy, that he just does a lot of the same rip-offs and homages. People say the same thing about Tarantino, but I don't know. I really appreciate the mastery and the artistry of taking something that you like and respect and putting your own twist on it and almost making it like your own thing, where if someone wasn't familiar with the works of Hitchcock or with the works of Antonioni, they would just think that this is DePalma's style, that this is just what he does. So these two films, I think, are a great double feature to kind of go into that jumping off point where he's like, okay, I'm going to get out of the horror genre that I kind of started in, right? He had Sisters, and then he had Carrie and The Fury. So now that he's covered his horror tracks, he really wants to go deep into the realm of suspense, and that's where these come in. So I was going to think we should just start chronologically with 1976's Obsession. Now, this was, I'm assuming, the first time watch of the two?
Oh, yeah. I had never heard of this movie until you had mentioned it.
What's your first impression of this film?
Oh, boy. This was... I'm going to be blatantly honest. This was a rough one for me. This is a slow, very slow movie. It takes a while for you to kind of build up to certain points. You know, you have the whole beginning of the movie with our main character dealing with the kidnapping of his family, and then of course their death, but then you get to the later half of the movie where he falls in love with someone who looks like his wife, but it's very slow. Like, there's just points of that movie that take forever to get to the point, or it's just like they're padding, at least in my opinion, just watching it for the first time. To me, this was just too slow for me. It didn't really lead to much of anything.
It's a very, very slow burn, and I'd say it's very comparable to what many consider Hitchcock's masterpiece, which is Vertigo, which in my opinion is Hitchcock's slowest burning film. The difference between that one and this one, and they share many similarities. In fact, Hitchcock himself was pissed when this came out because he was saying, hey, I know you like to emulate what I do, but you literally stole my movie and made your own version of it, which there's some twist to it. We can get into that in a second. That's one of the things that I think is the reason why this might be one of the most obscure DePalma films, one of the ones that a lot of people don't talk about, one of the ones that took a long time to get special edition DVD and Blu-ray and all the supplementals, is because people just didn't want to invest the time in it because it didn't really have the audience. It really didn't have the reception that a lot of the other DePalma films had. Where I find it to be a special film, and I agree with you, it's one of his weakest films, it's definitely slow, but where I get excited about talking about it and revisiting it sometimes is this is his I have to fail in order to succeed in the future. Like, this was him really taking risks, doing chances that really didn't work out on film, but he learned from those and was able to make future films less sluggish. The difference between Vertigo and this one is Vertigo is hypnotic. It's okay to have a slow burn in a sluggish film if you are hypnotized by the performances, by the cinematography, and by the music. Vertigo does that. It may not hit you that way on first viewing, but it does that over time. This doesn't have that magic. And so I think that's why it is oft forgotten and not spoken about. But there are some really interesting things in it, and that's what I would love to talk about. So let's talk about pros first of this one. What did you find interesting, or at least something that caught your attention and said, oh, you know what? Maybe I saw this in something else, or maybe I see what he was trying to do, but maybe he just didn't succeed. Do you have any recollections of those moments?
I mean, for me, I love on-location shots. Like, I love the fact that this takes place in Florence, or the majority of the movie takes place in Florence, and it is shot in Florence from what I've read. I love that. A lot of movies don't do that anymore. And so to see like him going to this church, which he's actually going to the church, or if he's going to these certain locations, I've always been a big fan of that. That kind of brings me back to, I didn't grow up watching movies like this. And I when it came to like Hitchcock, it was mostly like Psycho. Like Psycho was North by Northwest.
Psycho, The Birds. Yeah.
Really can pinpoint as like, oh, those are the most famous Hitchcockian films or Hitchcock films. So like, I didn't grow up with movies like this. So like movies that I can kind of look at and be like, oh, this kind of feels like this would be like 2001's Hannibal, which is the sequel to Silence of the Lambs. Cause it takes place a lot in Florence. And so, there's not a lot of similarities other than kind of the location, but it has they're both very eerie movies, kind of weird situations with the main characters. In this movie, it's a guy kind of grieving over the loss of his family and kind of rediscovering, I guess, himself, and then discovering, oh, there's somebody here who looks just like my wife. And then Hannibal,
right, which is where the Vertigo comes in.
Which I've never seen Vertigo, so I didn't know that connection. So it's very interesting to kind of look back and be like, oh, okay, now I can go back and watch Vertigo and be like, okay, and kind of pinpoint the things that are very similar to this movie.
I love what you said about like the eeriness of the movie and about the eeriness of Florence and shooting on location, because It takes place in two separate locations, essentially. It takes place in New Orleans and it takes place in Florence. What's cool about that, in my opinion, is you've got old Gothic versus new Gothic. New Orleans definitely has like a new Gothic flair to it, while Florence is the more historical one in the sense of its atmosphere and its architecture, and they both are very creepy. A few episodes back, I did The Beyond, the Fulci film that's shot on location in New Orleans. And one of the things that we said about that is you have an Italian director who knows how to do Italian Gothic, and he's doing it on location in New Orleans, and it makes New Orleans feel foreign. It makes it feel like it's not of this country, of this planet even. And there's some of that to this, but it gets bogged down in the script where, we go from his storyline, but then we have to cut to, one of the antagonists of the film, that's his business partner. There are moments where it kind of like, when I talked about that hypnotism of vertigo, that's where it gets screwed up because it doesn't take the time to follow through with the hypnotic moments. Instead, it cuts to, oh, now I'm talking to the doctor. Now I'm talking to the lawyer. Now I'm talking to my business partner and the maid, people that are trying to talk me out of this, marriage that I want to have with this woman that looks like my dead wife. That, I think, is the problem where he's going for the hypnotic feel, but the story, the way he has to progress the plot, that's what gets in the way with it. Before we get into that, we have to mention that the story was conceived by him and Paul Schrader, known for Taxi Driver and Cat People, hardcore. Like, you can tell where they're kind of butting heads with the screenplay, right? I can see where DePalma is really wanting to do the Hitchcock thing, but Schrader's trying to be the provocateur like he always is. So it kind of leads us into the next part of this movie, which is the uncomfortable, kind of insidious subject matter of it. Do you want to jump into that part? Like what your feelings of that were?
Oh boy. Yeah. So it was one of those things where I'm watching the movie, and when we finally get to the point where he kind of introduces himself to this woman, Sandra,
Mm-hmm.
who looks like his wife, a little bit, there was a little bit of part of me that literally was like, why do I feel that, can I spoil it?
Yeah, absolutely.
This is his daughter. And it just got weird from there. I mean, to be honest, this movie is just weird, period. It's just, Cliff Robertson is just, makes me feel uncomfortable. Like watching him on screen, his facial expression, he has no emotion. Like he has the same facial expression like the entire movie. He is in like this one mode the entire time, even when he's trying to woo over this woman who somehow is super interested in this guy. But then you figure out why.
Right.
Yeah, it was a twist that I kind of saw coming, but I was still kind of shocked at the end.
It's an interesting thing because it does do the vertigo, but it does take it a step further. And again, that's the Paul Schrader provocateur part to it. You do get that eerie feeling in your gut of like something's not right here. And there is something kind of interesting in the fact that I know that's what they were going for. They want to make you think that's the answer, then they want to make you think that it's not the answer until it all turns around and becomes the answer. Again, it's a formula that's a real hit and miss opportunity. And I guess for some people it hits because I've seen reviews and I've talked to people that it's not that they didn't see it coming, it's just they liked how the performance and the presentation of the twist happens. I think it's fine. I don't think that it saves the movie by any means, but it's definitely interesting because we have seen films go that way since then. And the most notable one, and it's how I discovered this film, was back in 2003 when I saw Oldboy. And I was so excited by that film, even though it does have like a lot of interesting and kind of yucky subject matter. But when I would go deep into the bowels of like, okay, well, what were the inspirations for this movie and what do the critics think? This title just kept popping up. And at the time in the early 2000s, this was a very hard to find film. Like, it wasn't on DVD yet. VHS had been long out of print. It barely played on TV because of its subject matter. It kind of became one of those lost De Palma films. So just the fascination of, there's a De Palma film that I haven't heard about and I can't find it. And it's kind of the inspiration for one of the coolest, most thought-provoking and disturbing movies of that particular era where Asian cinema was really getting big. I think that's what got me really interested into seeing it. And even though I was let down by it, and I've watched it quite a few times and all the stuff behind it, I have to give it credit where it's like, okay, it does have that jumping off point for a lot of filmmakers, and especially Korean cinema. Like, Korean cinema is very provoking anyway. Like, they like to push the buttons of social and sexual, taboo, but also not take it to the extreme where it could be considered pornography or a snuff film. I think that is one of the brilliances of Korean cinema. And to think that a lot of that kind of comes out of this, I just find really interesting and fascinating.
Yeah, it just kind of the way De Palma kind of wraps it around and gives it, he's trying not to lead you into anything early, but he definitely puts in some like Easter eggs to kind of pretty much tell you, oh yes, this is what's going on. Like, pretty early in the movie, like when you see the whole situation with his family in the beginning, you see that the fact that the daughter was never taken out. Like, right. In the first time seeing that scene, that it's not her in that blanket. And so I kind of was questioning things, but I didn't see it going in this direction. I didn't see the point of him getting into the relationship. I just thought from when you told me we were covering this movie, I read the description on like IMDb, and that was it. That's all I knew going into the movie. So I was,
lucky you.
So I was able to kind of feel all the emotions kind of going through it. Like I think this movie just made me uncomfortable like throughout. Like,
it does
just Robertson's performance. You have John Lithgow there, who is always wonderful in everything he does with his over the top Southern accent and him just being
chewing the scenery.
Yeah, he's always a highlight of anything he's in. So, and his performance compared to Cliff Robertson's, they're very polar opposite. Like, Cliff Robertson is going through this grief and going through all of these emotions of losing his family. But then you get a jump, right? From the time that they die to when he meets this woman. It's like, what, 20 years or close to it?
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be like 17 years. So very close to that. Enough for it to not be icky. Like, she's not underage.
Right.
Like, she's essentially college age if you do the math, which is one of the things that they're trying to like say, hey, it's okay that we're doing the story this way because she's not too young. However, Schrader's original script had multiple timelines that would have made it even more uncomfortable, and the studio wouldn't shoot that. And that kind of leads to my next thing about this, is how uneven this film does feel. The unevenness of the script is problem number one. Problem number two is, I think, De Palma's over-eagerness to try and recreate Vertigo. And then problem number three, Cliff Robertson's performance. De Palma hated it. A lot of people hated it. I like Cliff Robertson when he plays a secondary character. So I like him in All the President's Men, or if he's like the father or the grumpy granddad that shows up. Like, I like him in small doses. This is his movie, though. He's in every goddamn scene. And his demeanor is so sour. And like you said, I mean, it's grief and obsession. That's what this movie's about, right? That's what leads him to the decisions that he makes, which are all bad. And everyone tells him that they're all bad, but he just does it anyway because he is obsessed. I don't read obsession in his performance. I just read grief. If there was a performer that could really show us what the obsession was, for example, I mean, age appropriateness, it'd be a very different story, but George C. Scott, give me that guy. That guy will show obsessed. I mean, in Hardcore, that's his number one mission, is to find his daughter. That is his obsession. The Cliff Robertson performance does not work for me, and I think it is what makes this movie uneven. Also, it makes John Lithgow's already kind of hammy performance seem doubly so. Like you said, polar opposite, When it's just Lithgow on screen, if he's on the phone or when he's having like his secondary conversations that are adding to the plot line, you love to see what he's doing. But then when the two of them are in the same room together, it is 100% polarizing oil and water. Those performances don't match. And it just, again, kind of breaks up the already unevenness that this movie has.
Oh, absolutely. Like, I had only known Cliff Robertson from the Spider-Man movies. Like, he was
yeah.
Uncle Ben. He was my
Uncle
Uncle Ben. Yeah, I mean, so I like getting
Right.
to see him, in a way earlier movie, and getting to see, him in the lead role. Yeah, I was very disappointed because I've heard a lot of great things about Cliff Robertson and his career, and to see this, I was like, it was just very flat. Like I was stating, like, yeah, as you stated, it wasn't, just not a lot of emotion. Like, I understand you're grieving, but I wasn't even sensing grief. I was just sensing nothing. Like, there was just moments he's just doing nothing. He's not showing anything.
Nothing.
There's even moments where they're like zooming in on his face, and I'm still getting nothing. Like, at least show some sort of emotion where I can maybe feel bad for you, but I don't. Like, I just don't feel bad for this guy.
Your critique is echoing the critiques of many critics and cinema podcasters as well, including myself, where it's like, man, what is this performance? So we have to go to me, the crowning jewel of this film when it turns to performance, and that's Geneviève Bujold. She is so good in this movie. She essentially plays two roles. One is kind of silent because she's the mother with a gag in her mouth. She's, can't speak. But she's also in those scenes essentially acting against herself as the daughter, now grown. She has to portray two different styles of emotion and attachment to Cliff Robertson, who gives us nothing, and then has to give us that, second and up to the end of the third act performance of, I am a woman who loves him, who is infatuated by him. And even for those of us who are suspecting something's wrong, even if we're not sure that it's, let's say, the ruse that we get to see later on, we're almost convinced that she actually does love him in a romantic way, which makes it even more disturbing. And then they try and wrap it all up with the trauma at the end, which I think is rather effective because of her reverting back to this childhood state of mommy, mommy, daddy, daddy. Like, that is really, really, really gripping. And then it cuts to Cliff Robertson and we're bored again. Like, that's what kills me, man.
I hate when you watch a movie when that lead character is just being outshined by a supporting role. It's not even like slightly. She is out doing it in every scene. Either they're together or if she's, even scenes where she's not doing a lot of dialogue. Like, there's the scene where she's kind of looking through stuff in the locked bedroom, and discovering the newspaper clippings and all of the stuff. And for me, coming into it as a first time, watcher, I didn't know the twist. So I just thought she was kind of channeling the wife.
Right.
Like, she wanted to be her because, of course, he overshares about everything. Like, the fact that he's like, oh yeah, you look like my dead wife. And then kind of like goes into all of these descriptions about her and then tells her she's nothing like her other than they look alike. Like, they don't walk the same. They don't do. I was like, this is a weird conversation for you guys to be having on your first time hanging out.
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting film. And like I said, there are definitely reasons why it's been overlooked and forgotten about, and it was hard to find for a while. But just like anything these days, there are going to be cinematic fanboys who are going to fawn over it, and that's fine. You like what you like. I go back to my point of saying that I think it's a very worthy failure for DePalma to have, so he can really sharpen his skills in his future projects. Because literally after this point, he just gets better and better and better until he becomes, complacent, which is like the late 80s, early 90s for me. But this is the one I think that really, he had to have this be a financial failure. He had to get the criticism. He had to get the critiques that put him down as a director and Schrader down as a storyteller. And it's just like a necessary failure.
Absolutely. Overall, I just was not a fan of this one. This was definitely a one-time watch.
But you have it on your list now, and who knows, you You might be watching something else. You're like, oh, you know what? That reminds me of Obsession. It's just one more thing to add to your little, box of tricks. So let's reserve the rest of the episode for, to me, one of the most. This is my favorite DePalma film. And it's kind of interesting for me to compare it to my least favorite DePalma film in the same episode. But because they're both like his homage to the masters of suspense, it kind of works together. They both have twisty plot lines. They both pay a lot of visual and story homage to the things I just talked about. But this one works for me on nearly every level. And that is 1981's Blowout. So this is the one that you had at least some knowledge of or had seen before.
Yes, because I love Travolta from the 80s and 90s.
Mhm.
Like, I was obsessed with watching anything he was in post. Like, I wasn't a huge fan of like Grease and Saturday Night Fever. They just weren't my type of movies. But like
Right.
watching, I think this was one of my first Travolta films that I had ever seen once I had gone through like his 90s filmography. So yeah,
Right.
this is, but it's been a long time since I had watched this. So.
Well, let's just go ahead and start off with Travolta, because to me, this is Travolta's best film. This is Travolta's best performance, in my opinion. It's the one where he seems the least Travolta-ish, and that is a plus for me, because I like his speech pattern. I like his performances, but there are times where he's like, okay, well, now I have to be Travolta, and so I'm going to swagger and sway and do what I do. And it's fun. It's comical, a character, sometimes a Venice Beach caricature of John Travolta is literally the closest thing to his performance. But this one is by far the most nuanced performance, in my opinion. And the fact that it is in my favorite DePalma film as well is just like a double header for me. So let's hear your first impressions of this, and after revisiting it, what really worked for you, and what did you have, second thoughts about?
This movie, for one, the way the movie opens confused me to the point where I had to check to make sure I was watching the right movie, because the way that this movie opens
Right.
is, it's a movie. It's like you're just watching a movie. And it's
Right.
a generic slasher. And I went, I don't think that's what this movie is. And so I think I actually backed out of the movie to check to see if it was the right one. But once you get into it and you see Travolta, you see what he does and kind of how everything kind of falls into place. It is constantly going at 100 miles an hour. There is no lull periods. There is no, we gotta rest up. It is go, go, go the entire way. And I love when movies do that, because it's not a long movie, but it makes the runtime go a lot faster. And you're kind of, by the end, you're kind of wanting more, even though it kind of, wraps up pretty nice. Travolta kills it. He is just giving his best throughout the entire film. Just, it's, like you said, he's not really being Travolta. He is being this character. Mm-hmm. He is not doing the swag. He's not doing that. He's being whatever was written on the script, and he is doing a hell of a job doing it. And he's really carrying a lot of the people around him, because Nancy Allen, to me, was the weakest part of this movie.
It is. And we'll get to that in a second, because I think there's something to that, but go ahead.
No, I think like them being together was kind of my slight negative, because they're, again, I think they're the polar opposites of this movie, where, Travolta he's a guy trying to do his job. He works really hard at a job that doesn't do a lot for him, because it's not for like big budget movies. And then you have this, this prostitute who is involved in an accident, and they kind of cross paths, and their relationship throughout the movie is kind of the part of it that I kind of go, it doesn't really seem real to me. Like, that is kind of I kind of get taken out of the movie every time that they're having a conversation, because Nancy Allen is just going a little too over the top with her performance and her accent, and just the wit and what she's saying or doing, where Travolta is kind of the straight man as best as he can, especially being around her. but yeah, I think it's a nice mix of drama. It's a nice mix of action. You have this weird subplot of John Lithgow's there too as a
Again,
sadistic
yeah.
serial killer who it was kind of that was another thing that kind of confused me, but also I was really happy with how they incorporated it into the movie. It wasn't just kind of like, oh yeah, he's here now. It's like, no, he was here the whole
Right.
time, but he has other motives.
He's got other motives and he's got multiple missions going on.
Right.
Okay, so this is where I get excited to talk about this movie again. So this is essentially an unofficial remake of Antonioni's Blow Up, where instead of a magazine photographer who catches a murder on camera, Travolta is a sound engineer for B slasher movies. And while he's out recording, ambient sounds for his film, he picks up the sound of a car's tire being blown out before it drives off into the river, and he saves one of the occupants, which is Nancy Allen. This is the performance that Cliff Robertson should have had in Obsession. This is Obsession. Travolta plays an exhausted, obsessed individual whose obsession really has nothing to do with his life. It's just something because his life is so mundane now. He just does B-roll audio for these bad movies because of trauma that happened to him when he was, doing undercover work for the police. Now this is what it is. And it's a boring life. And this is where I think the dynamic with Nancy Allen actually works. Because he is so obsessed with his work, with his job, and now he's got this conspiracy that he's obsessed with, we get the idea that even though, hey, he's good-looking Travolta, this is a guy that doesn't socialize with anybody. His bedroom is in his audio space. Like, he's got his little cot in the corner, and then it's just reels and reels of sounds, and he's obsessed with sound. That is why I like that interaction with them, because it's a forced interaction because he saved her life. So even though there is no natural chemistry between them, he is now obsessed with her because she is a part of his ongoing obsession with his conspiracy. So that's why it works for me, even though I agree her accent and her performance is kind of out there. She's a bubblehead. This is where I kind of have some of the same issues with Obsession. And eventually we'll talk about Dress to Kill. I've got issues with Dress to Kill. DePalma has this weird thing in some of his earlier movies where there is this uncomfortable amount of hamminess in some of his movies. And it usually focuses around one character. So, for example, in Obsession, it'd be the John Lithgow character. And then I think in Carrie, it's kind of the mother character, It's an over-the-top performance. We described how much we liked it, but at the same time, it's a little hammy. And then in Dress to Kill, Nancy Allen's hamminess in that character kind of contradicts everything else that's going on in the movie. And for this one, it's Nancy Allen again. Like, we have this really great conspiracy story coming in at the tail end of the 70s conspiracy wave. Movies like Parallax View and 3 Days of the Condor. We're getting out of that now. We're in the 80s. And this is kind of like, putting the candle out on it and doing it in a great way. But that hamminess does kind of get in the way of what the movie's actually supposed to be doing. And I think that's where the movie is so good, the direction's so good, and the story's so good that it's just enough to edge out that kind of lackluster and hammy performance from her and from Dennis Franz, because he's kind of hammy too. But yeah, I get exactly what you're talking about when it comes to that.
Yeah, speaking of Dennis Franz, I was that man hadn't changed in like 20 or 30 years. He looked exactly
Right?
the same from when I grew up watching NYPD Blue.
It's funny too that like DePalma used him and Lithgow in practically everything in the 70s and early 80s, because Franz comes back again in Dress to Kill in essentially the same kind of role, just as a detective this time instead of a tabloid dude. But one of the things too that really makes this movie work for me, like you said, the pacing, which is the polar opposite of Obsession. Like, once that tire blows out, it is go, go, go nonstop. And it has a surprisingly large amount of plot twists and turns all throughout the movie. It just doesn't wait until the end. Like there are people who are not who you think they are. There are things that really frustrate you because, hey, Travolta's got all this evidence, and then Lithgow's one step ahead of him and erases it. He who's setting up who? That is masterful storytelling. And DePalma wrote this script. And we're going to talk about it in another film. When DePalma writes to what he's directing, I feel that he always fares better than when he's writing someone else's work. And the cool thing about De Palma when he writes is he writes what he knows. Like 3 or 4 of his films are all about the industry. They work their way into other plot structures, right? But Body Double, the same thing. It's about the porn industry and the film industry. And they show you a lot of the intricacies of the technology of film. In this case, it's audio. When you're watching all of the intricacies of how they're splicing audio and he edits and he captures, and you're seeing the machines that you don't understand, but you're recognizing that this is how the movie you're watching was made, it takes you to like a deeper level than just what the surface of the movie is supposed to be. And I love that about early De Palma stuff.
Yeah, it just kind of, I love how the movie was shot. I love how everything kind of is either up close or it is far away. You have, when there's car chases, it's like, you have the helicopter shots and it's like you barely see the car. But then when things are happening like in a room, it is very close. Like, when Travolta's working, it's either, kind of, room spinning shots or very close up shots. Travolta is 110% into this role. He is sweating. He is just focused. He is just giving everything he has into kind of a role that I think most people could have stepped into, but probably not done as good of a job. But it's one of those roles where I think most actors of, big actors of that time could have stepped in and done something similar. But I think Travolta kind of takes it to another level, which puts it.
No, yeah, I agree. And for the most part, he's not a method actor. It's not like Dustin Hoffman in Marathon Man, where it's like, I'm not going to sleep for days, so I look exhausted and beat up. He did suffer from insomnia, though, while he was making this, so that kind of adds to like his general exhaustion. But De Palma is in love with Travolta's face in this movie, and I can't bless him enough for it. There are so many close-ups of his face, like you just said, when he's got his headphones on and he's listening to the things he recorded, especially that scene where he's like in his mind reenacting when he was out by the pond, and he's got the pencil as if the pencil was his little boom mic, and he's following the pencil to where the sounds were, and it's just a tight close-up on his face. And then we got the rear projection shot where like he is visually seeing what had happened that night before. Those moments in this movie, and there are several of them, it just gets you so immersed into the Travolta character where you're no longer just watching a movie about Travolta. You are literally like there hand in hand with him as he's experiencing these things. It's one of those films that like not a lot of movies do that to me, where I'm like, oh my God, I'm like right with him in this.
Yeah, because that whole the whole scene of him gathering the sounds, and then you kind of revisit that throughout the movie, where it's him actually getting the sound. So it's more of a personal thing where you are getting a zoomed out shot where you're with the couple that he's kind of getting sounds from, and you got the woman who reacts to it like, oh, look at that creep up there, spying on us.
Right.
But it's mostly on him, or he's getting the owl, so it zooms in on the owl, and I like that. But then
great scene.
when you get to like when he is kind of diving into this conspiracy and starting to obsess, then you have him you get the whole scene reenacted, but he's got I think a pencil in his hand where he's kind of pointing in different directions, and then you're brought back to that scene where you're figuring out what it is, but you're getting different shots of those things. Like you're getting a different shot of the couple, you're getting a different shot of the owl, the frog, and all that. And then, I think the fact of constantly getting the car crashing, Like, I think that is, I think some people might see that as like, okay, we can move on from this. But it's like, no, that's what he's obsessing over this. So to see this
like I
over
said,
and over again.
There's more obsession in this movie than there is in the movie Obsession.
and just the little things with Travolta. Travolta has a certain way he smokes, and he does it in like every movie. He has a very certain way of like holding a cigarette. And I always found that interesting because I've seen many movies with him and he does the same thing. And
it's as if he's almost about to drop it but doesn't. Like,
he tucks it in.
It's such a nonchalant way of like smoking. I get exactly what you're talking about. I'd like to talk about like this recurring theme that this film has that De Palma uses a lot in his movies, and that's the theme of voyeurism. You know, it's essentially the whole plot of the movie Sisters and the whole plot of Dress to Kill. We get a lot of it in the movie Body Double. Like, Body Double is essentially about voyeurism. It kind of goes back to the whole Rear Window thing, right? One of the things that I think gets overlooked in Travolta's character in this is that he really is a voyeur. He's a voyeur for hire, right? He is finding sounds and he's finding life to put into these movies, but he's also so intrigued about what's going on in the world around him that this is why he's chosen this profession. It's the reason why he was an undercover guy too. Like, he is obsessed with other people's lives and things going around him. So what I like about that story plot in this is that we are creating a voyeur that is not as creepy as the voyeurs that are presented in other Hitchcock movies, other De Palma movies. So we kind of give him a pass. It's like safe voyeurism. It's a way that he's been able to like feed that need that he has, but not seem creepy. But if you take a step back and look at it, it's like, okay, his obsession with Sally is kind of creepy. It comes from the end of like, okay, well, I saved your life and I care about you and I want you to be okay. But the fact that he can't let her go and he can't let any of the events going on go, it puts a different spin on what that character really is. He's not a healthy dude. So a lot of the things that happen to him and the people that he cares for in this movie are 100% by his hand. And he has to live with that. And that's why the end is so piercing. It could be said it's a cliche ending. We've seen things like it before, but the reason why it hits so hard is because we understand that his voyeuristic tendencies and his need to know what's going on, despite the pain and suffering that other people are going to experience because of it. That final shot of his face when, you know, he's like, oh my God, I'm going to use this moment that I captured on audio that's going to live forever. And it's the way that I'm going to have my penance paid for the people that got hurt from my obsession. Mwah. Love it.
It's so good. It was one of those, I had to like rewind and rewatch the ending because I watched it and I was like, did he really use Sally's scream in that final? Because the whole throughout it's this very minuscule like part of the movie where he's constantly at odds with his boss at the studio about finding the right scream. But sometimes as the story goes on and as the movie moves on, you kind of forget about it, but then it's like kind of sprinkled in here and there. And then when you get to the end and it's like, it's that same scene that they're still trying to find that scream. And he puts in Sally's scream from when she died. Like, you're like, holy shit, that is powerful.
It's an interesting little side story into the inclusion of like those little mini plot points you're talking about trying to find the right scream because every scream is terrible. You know, it's a B movie and the girl getting stabbed has the worst scream. And so they audition girls to be the replacement scream and they're all just as bad, if not worse. It came from this thing that De Palma had noticed when he was working in his early Grindhouse days, right? When he was still just, you know, a low-level filmmaker, fresh out of film school or art school, and he was working for all these Grindhouse B-movie guys. And he said that there would be guys who were like casting women for topless scenes, and he would literally be in the office with the producer, and the producer would just walk through the room of topless women and just be like, no, go find more. He's like, these are beautiful topless women, but this guy just had an idea of what topless woman he wanted. And so they would just bring in rooms full of these topless actresses to do these roles. And he just was so obsessed with the fact that, okay, this guy is walking past the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, and they're not right for him. And that's kind of where the whole finding the right scream came in. It's like, it's so comical that you've got something that no one else has and no one else can touch or grab or even be close to. And you're just like, nope, 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 pass on. So when we do watch these movies, especially the ones that cover the industry like he likes to do, we're seeing a lot of echoes of things that he experienced as a filmmaker coming into his craft. What are your favorite moments of this film?
I to be honest, even though Lithgow is in the movie for very, very small amount of time, it's crazy how much screen time he gets in this movie. It's only, it has to be like a few minutes. At least that's how it feels.
Yeah. It's like short little spurts.
But he is so good at playing like these sadistic serial killers. Like the way he stalks his victims, the whole, one of my favorite scenes is the whole train station scene when he is, you got the sailor who's getting a blowy in one of the phone booths, and he kind of lures the girl, follows her to the bathroom, and then he's got the watch, wire,
gravette, whatever. Yeah,
and that whole scene, like the fact that you don't see it is what I love about it. You see it from the other side of the door. You just see her feet dangling there, but you know what's going on. It really, I love Dexter, and he was one of probably the best parts of that show.
Right.
And I definitely see some of this character in the Trinity Killer, which was the character he played in that. And so, yeah, he's just so good at being able to kind of switch on and off between being a sadistic killer to being a comedic actor. Like Lithgow is just great in whatever he does.
I want to jump on that train scene really fast. I love that train scene. I love the way it's shot. I love the fact that it's a combination of like very long single take steady cam shots, that kind of disappear and cut to closer shots. So this is Tarantino's favorite De Palma movie. It's Tarantino's favorite Travolta performance. Every time I watch Kill Bill, there's a scene that right when they get into, right before the fight against the Crazy 88 in the Japanese tea house, right? As we see the girl group on the stage, the 5, 6, 7, 8s, and we're following Oren Ishii up and down the stairs and back down the stairs, and Charlie Brown and the matron of the thing, and then we're following Beatrix through it. It's a mixture of crane shots and Steadicam shots and some handheld shots. Go back and watch the train sequence of Blowout, and then watch that sequence afterwards, and you get exactly what Tarantino was trying to do. That scene is the perfect emulation of how De Palma uses the Steadicam shots and follows the prostitute and follows the sailor, and then it follows Lithgow, and then it cuts to him waving the money. It's very, very similar. And when you get to like watch more Tarantino films and more films like this, you catch what he's trying to do. It's like him saying, I loved this movie, I loved this scene, and this is my version of it. And that train scene, 100%. It's one of the best scenes in the movies of the 80s, I think. For me, I love anything that De Palma does with the rear projection trick, right? So I love the whole part with Travolta's face in the pencil, and then we see the car crash behind him. I love the scene in The Fury where Amy Irving is holding on to Charles Durning's hand, and she's on the staircase, and then we see everything that was happening to Robin behind it. Same effect. But at the end, during the Liberty Bell celebration, with the fireworks going up in the background, and Travolta's holding Nancy Allen, and the camera's just circling around them for like a minute, and it's just the red and the blue flashes across their face. Very simple cinematic technique, but goddamn, does it just get me every single time. And to me, that's like one of my favorite moments in the movie visually. But the train sequence technically is my favorite for sure. So we've covered two very different De Palma films tonight. similar in the sense that they are homages to the masters of suspense, Antonioni and Hitchcock. One, we're kind of just a little cold on, it doesn't really do it for us. And the other one might be one of our favorite DePalma films, maybe one of my favorite films of the 80s. It's just crazy how it's different now because I feel filmmakers are so disposable. Like, you really have to work hard to get your name out there and then keep it out there, or else you just kind of fizzle away. Where back then, if you were an auteur and you could do some really visually stunning stuff and stuff that could draw a box office, you were allowed to make some mistakes and some mishaps as long as they weren't too expensive. Because wouldn't it be terrible if 1976, after the failure of Obsession, that we didn't get another De Palma movie? Like, that would suck. We wouldn't have Blowout, and we wouldn't have all these different things. So I think it's a good way to kind of go back, cross-compare these two, watch these two, and, really kind of discuss, like we did, which one was our favorite, which one we didn't like, and why. So at the end of the day, I will always tell people, go revisit or go watch for the first time any of these movies, but I will probably watch Obsession again just to try and understand it better one more time, but I'm not going to do it anytime soon. But I could literally hang up with you right now and go watch Blowout again. Like, that's what that movie is for me.
Yeah, Blowout is definitely the more rewatchable film for me. I just, Travolta, just Travolta brings me into that movie, and seeing it. And to be honest, I knew Lithgow was in it, but I didn't know what kind of role he had in it. So seeing who he was and his performance in it for the very short amount of time, it's definitely a movie that kind of grabs onto you and doesn't let go. And that's a kind of movie that I want to rewatch, because Obsession didn't do that. Obsession kind of laid me down to bed. It was like, you're feeling sleepy. Obsession is a good movie where if you're tired and you need something to put on to go to bed to.
Well, Brett, thank you so much for jumping on and talking about these movies again. I can't wait to talk about our next group of De Palma films in a few months or so. It's just, now I'm going back to the whole catalog because they're so much fun. Even the bad ones are kind of fun sometimes, at least to be like, oh, that was bad. Why did you do that? But let's talk about you right now. So Dissect the Film just came back into its new season. You guys are just trailing ahead and getting episodes done. So we're really close to the release date of when this is recording. So what do you got coming up in the next couple of weeks?
We have the end of our 1985 month. We did we recorded The Black Cauldron. Then we journey into 1986, where we talked about, we have The Great Mouse Detective, we have Little Shop of Horrors, and then we have Leprechaun 2 for St. Patrick's Day. That's kind of what's going on I say that over the next month. But yeah, we're excited to get back into season 2, because season 1 was a very long one. That was, we were doing it for 3 years, and we decided we took our break to kind of hop into a new season, fresh start type thing. But yeah, we're excited to be back doing it again. And I'm always excited to be back on here talking with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you got my number, man. I'll be more than happy to jump on there and talk about anything else in your new season. It's really exciting. So everyone, you can find Dissect That Film in the show notes of this episode, in my Cultworthy Partners page on thecultworthy.com. But where would you like people to find you?
You can find us on all the major social media apps. We're just type in Dissect That Film. You can find us on all the podcast apps. We're on YouTube at Dissect That Film. Yeah, just type in Dissect That Film pretty much anywhere, you'll find us.
Absolutely. Well, again, I can't thank you enough for tonight. And everyone, thank you for joining us. Please subscribe to both the Cultworthy Cinema Podcast and Dissect That Film. We love it. Write, review, rate, share, all those great things. And don't sleep on the YouTube. I know we're a podcast. You're probably listening to me on Apple or Spotify, but get on the YouTube, see our pretty faces. We put a lot of work into it, right?
Right. I mean, you more than me, but yeah.
What can I say? Anyways, thank you so much, everyone, and we'll talk to you later.